My name is Eliza Matthews. I'm 32, thriving in finance and living in Manhattan, but somehow I've never been enough for my father. That fact has shaped my life more than any career milestone. This year, I gifted him a brand new Mercedes, hoping naively that success could finally earn me his approval. But what I didn't expect was that the real revelation would come from a sealed envelope in my purse. A DNA test I hadn't planned to use that night. By the end of our annual family reunion, I would finally understand the coldness I grew up with and why Richard Matthews could never truly love me. From the outside, our home looked like something off the cover of a real estate brochure, white-pillared, ivy-kissed, perfectly manicured. We lived in the kind of Boston suburb where neighbors waved with 2 fingers from leather-trimmed SUVs and gossip was delivered with smiles sharp enough to cut skin. People saw our family and assumed we were the portrait of success. What they didn't see was the rot beneath the gloss. Richard Matthews, my father in name, if not in spirit, built his real estate empire from the ground up and never let anyone forget it. To the world, he was a visionary. To us, he was gravity. Unmoving, unforgiving, impossible to escape. He was never cruel in the way some fathers are. There were no bruises, no raised voices. His cruelty was colder, quieter, more insidious. It lived in the silence after my wins, in the narrowing of his eyes when I brought home a B+ instead of an A. It pulsed in every, "You could have done better," every. What was the point if you didn't come first? I grew up learning that second place wasn't a silver medal. It was failure, dressed in shame. Praise was a currency he never spent on me. Not because I didn't earn it, but because I wasn't the right kind of investment. My mother, Caroline, was warmth wrapped in hesitation. She laughed with us when he wasn't home, brushed hair from our faces, tucked us in with songs that sounded like lullabies, even when her eyes looked empty. But the moment he walked into the room, she shrank. Her spine curved inward, her voice softened to a whisper. She was a woman who learned to survive by never challenging the storm. I didn't understand it at first. I thought maybe she just didn't want to upset him. But over time, I realized it was deeper than fear, it was conditioning. Her entire identity had been shaped around not becoming a problem. And when you learn to disappear to avoid being destroyed, you lose yourself without even noticing. My older brother James never had to try. He walked through life like the rules had been written in his favor. Captain of the football team, early admission to Dad's alma mater, the heir apparent to the family business. He was the son Richard had always wanted. Strong, charismatic, predictable. He knew how to mimic our father's language, how to mirror his pride. I used to think James was just lucky. Later, I realized he was simply the version of a child our father had ordered from the universe and received. Then there was Sophia, my younger sister by 2 years. She was the ghost in the machine, the one who learned early how to read a room and vanish when the energy shifted. Sophia wasn't ambitious like James or rebellious like me. She was intuitive, clever in a quiet way. She could make our father laugh when no one else dared to speak. But when his mood soured, she disappeared, slipped out of view like smoke. She was the family's emotional first responder, patching up wounds with whispered reassurances and late-night visits to my room. "It's not you," she used to tell me, "he's just like that." As if, like, that was something we were all supposed to understand and excuse. But I couldn't. Not forever. Because while James inherited the name and Sophia mastered the silence, I inherited something else entirely, the impossible task of being enough. I chased excellence like it owed me something. Straight A's, debate trophies, science fairs. But the goalposts moved every year. When I got into Cornell on a full scholarship, he said, "Why not follow tradition and go where James went?" When I earned 2 part-time jobs and kept my GPA, he asked, "Why aren't you interning somewhere meaningful?" When I got hired at Goldman Sachs, his response was, "Let's see if you last a month." 8 years later, after 3 promotions and a reputation I carved with my own hands, he still looked at me like I was some struggling artist trying to make her hobby respectable. He never said he was proud, not once. And I told myself I didn't need it, that I was stronger because of it, that the ache in my chest every time he dismissed me was just a reminder to try harder. But here's what they don't tell you. Growing up without love doesn't make you resilient. It makes you starved. You spend your whole life trying to feed yourself with achievements that never taste like enough. I thought success would fix it, that one day he'd look at me and see value, but in his eyes, I was always the defective product, the daughter with the wrong wiring. Not quite Matthews enough. I didn't know it then, but the truth, the real truth, was sitting dormant inside me like a fault line. Waiting, watching. And when it finally cracked open, the aftershock would tear apart everything I thought I knew about my family, my identity, and myself. This was never just about approval. It was about belonging. And in the Matthews house, I was always looking in from the outside. A house full of windows, but no light. There's a heartbreak so specific, so personal. It doesn't come from failure. It comes from succeeding in front of someone who chooses not to see you. It's the ache of invisibility wrapped in the glow of achievement. And for me, that was the flavor of love I grew up on, bitter quiet and always out of reach. I didn't just build a career in finance, I survived it. While others relied on family names, private introductions, and inherited credibility, I was the intern who took the late-night subway home in borrowed shoes. I was the analyst who said yes to every miserable task because no one else would. I worked holidays, skipped birthdays, slept under my desk more times than I care to admit. Not because I loved the grind, but because I believed deeply that if I became undeniable, even he would have to acknowledge me. And in many ways, I did become undeniable. Youngest senior investment strategist in my firm's history. Forbes 30, under 30 to watch. I closed multi-million-dollar deals with men twice my age, who once called me kiddo and now asked for my advice. I bought my Manhattan apartment outright. No help, no cosigner, no borrowed credibility, just grit, insomnia, and compound interest. When I finally called home breathless from the promotion, my mother said, "That's wonderful, darling. I'll tell your father." Then silence. A day, then 2, then a week. No call, no message, no "I'm proud of you." Nothing, just a void so familiar it didn't even sting like it used to. It hummed in the background like bad lighting, always there, always unflattering. At Thanksgiving, between mouthfuls of cranberry sauce, he finally said, "Your mother tells me you've made some big moves in finance. That field's just elegant gambling, but I suppose someone has to do it." That was his praise. A backhanded swipe dressed in polite neutrality. It was like setting yourself on fire and hearing someone sigh about the mess on the carpet, but I still hoped, still fought, still searched for the right key to unlock whatever part of him held approval hostage. That's why I bought the car. It wasn't about luxury. It wasn't about image. It was a symbol, a peace offering forged from late nights and pay raises and years of trying to be worthy. A black Mercedes S-Class custom interior, top of the line, everything. I didn't choose it for the leather seats. I chose it for what it might mean. I pictured the look on his face, the glimmer of recognition. The weight of disappointment finally lifted, replaced by something resembling pride. But when I gave it to him, he examined it like a property with too many flaws. "What's the interest rate on this?" he asked. Then, as if on cue, "Did you lease it?" Women sometimes make emotional financial choices. He said it with a smirk. I laughed. I always laugh. Then I went back to my hotel and cried so hard into a towel I nearly choked. Still, I thought maybe tomorrow, maybe in front of the whole family, he'd say something. acknowledgement, even veiled, would be enough. Instead, during dinner, he stood before a room full of relatives and colleagues and gestured proudly to the car. "Sometimes you have to treat yourself," he said to James. "Success has its privileges." He paraded it like a trophy, but not of my success, of his. A man who had given me nothing but silence, now accepting gifts as if they were proof of his greatness. Not a word about where the car came from. Not a glance in my direction. Not even a thank you. That wasn't forgetfulness. It was intentional. A clean, elegant erasure. Like I'd never existed in the equation at all. And still, pathetically, I waited for something. For a nod, a comment, a moment, some crack in the armor where love might leak through. But it never came, because he never saw me. And that night, for the first time in my life, I began to understand maybe he never would. 3. It began like most catastrophes do, in silence, with no warning. Just a random Tuesday night, a glass of wine in one hand and my phone in the other, aimlessly scrolling through flash sales and novelty gadgets. That's when I saw it, 50% off a DNA kit. I clicked buy on a whim. It felt harmless, almost fun. I wasn't chasing secrets. I was looking for a story, maybe a sprinkle of Irish ancestry, or proof of some distant Scandinavian bloodline. I wanted to trace my roots, not unravel them. What I didn't know then was that I'd just triggered the detonation sequence for everything I thought I knew about myself. The results came in with bright colors and cheery graphs. Maternal line consistent. Ethnicity estimates unsurprising. But then, tucked near the bottom, a line that didn't match. A small anomaly in the paternal markers. A potential mismatch, the site said, bland language for something earth-shattering. I stared at that word mismatch like it had teeth. My first reaction was denial. Clearly, it was a lab error. Glitchy code. Maybe I'd misread something. I cross-referenced data from cousins who'd also done tests. I uploaded raw files, joined forums, reached out to customer support. But the inconsistency remained. My family tree was missing its roots. And then came the thought I couldn't unthink. What if Richard Matthews isn't my biological father? The man who raised me? The man who never hugged me the way he hugged my siblings? The man whose approval I'd chased like oxygen, only to be handed silence in return? I tried to ignore it, shoved it into a mental drawer labeled too dangerous to open. But the truth has a way of haunting you. It seeps into dreams, rewrites childhood memories in real time. It turns whispers into thunder. Suddenly, every moment I'd once brushed off as normal, his cold eyes, the absence of affection, the way he praised James and Sophia, but merely tolerated me, took on a new, sharper meaning. A week later, I visited my parents' house for a weekend. I remember standing in the master bathroom, my pulse hammering in my ears. The hairbrush sat on the counter, still warm from his morning routine. I don't know what came over me, but my hand moved before my brain could catch up. I plucked 3 strands of hair root intact and sealed them in an envelope like a piece of contraband. It felt criminal, and somehow it also felt necessary. 8 business days. That's how long it took to unmake me. Probability of paternity %. Not low, not questionable, not uncertain. 0. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. Not because I was shocked, but because I wasn't. The confirmation hit like a quiet truth that had always been there, just waiting for me to be brave enough to see it. The final piece in a lifelong puzzle. Suddenly, his distance made sense. His disdain had a shape. I wasn't the daughter who disappointed him. I was the daughter who didn't belong. I didn't tell anyone. Not right away. I carried the truth like a live wire in my purse, too dangerous to touch. It wasn't shame that kept me silent. It was disorientation. If Richard Matthews wasn't my father, then who was? And more terrifying, if the man I spent my whole life trying to impress had never really been my father, then who was I trying to be all this time? What part of me was truly mine? What had been shaped by biology, and what had been contorted by years of emotional rejection? I had built an entire identity on sand, and now the tide was coming in. The test results lived in my purse like a secret too heavy to carry and too dangerous to let go. For weeks, they followed me everywhere, tucked inside a cream-colored envelope with perfect edges, perfectly silent. It was a truth wrapped in stillness, waiting for a storm. Some nights, I would sit alone in my apartment, the city lights casting gold across my floor, and I'd reach for it. I'd run my fingers along the sealed flap, feel the delicate ridge of the paper, and imagine what it would sound like if I tore it open in front of the whole family. I never opened it, not again. I didn't need to. I had memorized what was inside. Probability of paternity 0%. Not a doubt, not a maybe, a verdict. I wasn't Richard Matthews' daughter, and yet I stayed quiet. Not out of fear, but out of paralysis. The truth was a loaded gun, and I wasn't sure I was ready to pull the trigger. Not because I feared the sound of the shot, but because I didn't know what world would exist after the echo faded. But as the annual family reunion drew near, the envelope began to hum in my bag like it had its own heartbeat. Every slight, every dismissal, every perfectly polite cruelty he'd ever thrown at me started replaying like courtroom footage in my mind. Exhibit A, you're too emotional to lead. Exhibit B, James just gets it, you know. Exhibit C, some people are born to shine. Others, well, someone has to support the stars. That one stayed with me the longest. It hit me one night around 2 a.m. that I'd spent most of my life living in exile and never questioned it. I had turned my exile into decor, made it livable, comfortable even. I'd built a whole house inside a place I was never meant to be. And I called it family. I started drafting imaginary speeches, monologues of reckoning. I pictured myself walking into the dining room, slapping the envelope on the mahogany table like evidence in a trial. My voice calm, but final. You want legacy. Here's your truth. I dreamed of gasps of silence, of eyes widening, but the fantasy always ended the same way, me, standing alone watching them close ranks around each other, like I had never been one of them to begin with. And maybe I hadn't. It wasn't the fallout that frightened me. I could handle chaos. I had built a career in boardrooms full of men twice my age trying to discredit me. What scared me was the silence that might follow. The moment after impact, when the dust settles and there's nothing left. No family, no name, no history I could still believe in. What was I really protecting by staying silent? A man who hadn't hugged me since I was 12. A lineage that praised my siblings and tolerated me like background noise. A legacy that wanted nothing to do with me, but still demanded my silence. Maybe the lie wasn't mine to carry. Maybe it never had been. The day before the reunion, I stood in front of my mirror for nearly an hour, trying on outfits, practicing smiles, rehearsing how to tell the truth without sounding like a wreck. I imagined confronting him in the hallway, or mid-toast, or in a quiet corner of the garden where no one could hear. I played out every version, every tone, soft, sharp, confrontational, cold. None of them fit. Because this wasn't a performance. This wasn't about revenge or spectacle. This was about finally stepping out of a shadow I was never meant to live in. Taylor's voice echoed in my mind. If you show him that envelope, it's not just the end of this argument, it's the end of everything. But maybe that was the point. The foundation had always been cracked. I was just the only one willing to admit it had never been safe to stand on. So I stopped rehearsing. I let go of the speech. I folded the dress I'd picked and set it aside. I decided I wouldn't plan the moment. I would let it find me. If the right silence fell, if the right insult landed, if he reminded me once again that I didn't belong, I'd respond. Not with rage, not with tears, but with truth. Not to burn the house down, but to finally walk out of it and never look back. The sky was the kind of blue that dares you to feel hopeful, brilliant, cloudless, almost theatrical. It stretched wide and arrogant above me as I pulled onto the street of my childhood, daring me to believe this day might go differently. That maybe somehow things would crack open, that I might finally be seen, but I knew better. The driveway, lined with its perfectly manicured maples, looked exactly as it always had, timeless, unchanging, like the people inside. I arrived 10 minutes early because of course I did. Because punctuality was one of the few things I could control. I circled the cul-de-sac, twice my hands, gripping the steering wheel so tightly the leather creaked beneath my fingers. My knuckles pulsed white. Beside me on the passenger seat lay the envelope. Still sealed. Still unopened since the day the lab confirmed the truth I'd already lived. Probability of paternity, 0%. I didn't need to read it again. I could have recited it in my sleep. That sentence had tattooed itself across the walls of my memory. Every time he ignored me, dismissed me, looked through me, I heard it. I parked a block away, out of sight. I needed a moment, not to prepare. That had happened over years. I just needed to breathe. To slip into the mask I'd worn so often, it now fit like skin. The poised daughter, the professional, the prop. As I approached the stone walkway, I could hear them, those familiar polished sounds of a Matthews family gathering. Ice clinking in glasses. Laughter timed to social rhythms. My mother's voice, light and practiced, floated above the hedges like a ribbon. So glad you made it. Oh yes, just around the corner, James has been dying to tell that story again. Inside that house, the performance had already begun. Lines delivered. Smiles cued. Applause earned. It was a well-rehearsed play. But my role still unwritten. And maybe, just maybe this time, I wouldn't follow the script. The moment I stepped through the doorway, I was swallowed by choreography. Air kisses brushed against my cheeks like passing shadows. Compliments came and went like automatic doors. You look radiant. That color is so you. Still in finance, as if my existence was a cocktail fact, a box to check off. No one really saw me. I could have been a mannequin in pearls and they'd still have offered the same compliments. Then came my mother. Always first. Always on cue. Darling, she said, voice bright with effort. She pulled me into a hug that lasted 0.8 seconds, just long enough for show, not long enough for comfort. You look lovely, she added, eyes scanning the room mid-embrace, already 3 steps ahead in the social dance. Your father's out back with the Petersons. They've been asking about you. Of course they had. I was the shiny object, the high-achieving daughter whose job no one quite understood, but everyone liked to name drop. And then I saw it. The car, the black Mercedes I had bought with my promotion bonus, parked front and center, gleaming in the afternoon sun, like a trophy at a country club raffle. My gift, my sacrifice, his centerpiece. I stared at it and felt a slow, cold humiliation slide over me like wet silk. It wasn't pride he felt. It was ownership. Inside, James stood near the wine bar, surrounded as always by admirers who treated his every real estate story like gospel. My father stood beside him, smiling, nodding, timed perfectly with every punchline. It was a familiar rhythm like music I'd grown up with. James played the melody and father offered the harmony. When he saw me, my father offered a nod. Just a nod, barely a chin lift. The kind of acknowledgement you give a passing colleague, a barista you vaguely recognize. Not the daughter who had once stayed up all night learning tax code to impress him. No smile, no warmth, no mention of the car. No hello. I moved through the house like smoke. Present, but untouchable. I smiled at uncles. I laughed at jokes I didn't hear. I sipped wine I couldn't taste. And all the while, the envelope in my purse throbbed like a second heartbeat. That envelope was gravity. It made my steps heavier, my posture tighter, my breathing shallower. It was a truth I carried like a secret blade sheathed for now, but never out of reach. I found Sophia in the hallway by the back stairs. Her eyes met mine, instantly serious. She hugged me with her full body, grounding me for half a second. "You okay?" she whispered, just for me. "Not even close," I said. She nodded once. That was enough. She didn't need the details. She'd lived enough of them to understand. As I drifted toward the main room, I kept hearing snippets of my father's voice, low, commanding, endlessly confident. Yes, it's the new model, fully loaded, hand-stitched interiors, German engineering at its finest. He was talking about the car. Not me, never me. He gestured to the vehicle like he'd earned it, like success had magically materialized at his feet, another badge of patriarchal triumph. He didn't tell them it came from me, that it cost nearly a year of my life, that I bought it not for flash, but for hope, for the impossible miracle of pride. He was rewriting history in real time, and I was watching my identity be edited out of the story. My grip tightened around the stem of my wine glass. My fingers were starting to ache. I could feel the moment coming. It was like thunder behind glass. That slow, gathering pressure before lightning strikes. Someone would say the wrong thing. Someone would compliment the car, or mention legacy, or ask why I hadn't settled down, or suggest I was finally earning my place in the family. And when they did, I wouldn't smile. I wouldn't nod. I wouldn't take another sip. I would open the envelope, not out of spite, not to win, but because I was done playing a part in someone else's lie. Because the only way to survive the stage was to stop being the prop and finally become the storm. Dinner began with the sound of curated elegance, crystal clinking like wind chimes in a storm that hadn't arrived yet. The rustle of linen napkins folded just so, and polite murmurs carefully crafted to suggest intimacy. The dining room itself looked like a page torn from a luxury lifestyle magazine, gleaming mahogany bone-white china, edged in gold centerpieces bursting with hydrangeas and white roses that smelled faintly of performance. Everything perfect. Everything pretending. We took our assigned seats with the precision of actors entering Act 2 of a play we had all performed too many times to count. James naturally was at Father's right hand, Rebecca glowing beside him, basking in proximity. Sophia sat a few seats down with her husband, her smile calm, but her eyes alert. Me, I was exiled to the far end of the table across from a cousin's painfully awkward fiancé, and beside one of my father's former interns, now some mid-level executive, he took credit for molding, fitting. I'd been seated among the decorative, not the essential. At my side, the envelope pressed against my hip like a secret weapon wrapped in silk. I hadn't touched it since arriving. I didn't need to. Its contents pulsed in my bloodstream louder than the string quartet playing faintly from the corner. The first course arrived in a synchronized ballet of waitstaff seared scallops over a fennel puree, garnished with microgreens that no one would eat. Conversation floated above the table, like mist light, and inconsequential. The Petersons asked about Sophia's work on the Children's Hospital Board. Someone complimented the Pinot. A second cousin gushed about her upcoming wedding in Santorini. Everything was beautiful. Everything was empty. But underneath the surface, beneath the laughter and stemware, I could feel the familiar undertow building. The slow current of hierarchy of unspoken roles and power dynamics sharpened over decades. Then came the inevitable opening shot. "So, Eliza?" Uncle Robert said, his voice warm with just a hint of condescension. "I hear you've had quite the promotion. Senior investment strategist, was it impressive stuff?" I smiled, grateful for a brief second for the opportunity to speak on my own terms. I opened my mouth, but the space between inhale and sentence was all my father needed. He cleared his throat, that imperceptible cue that signaled control. The room shifted toward him almost unconsciously. "It's a fine title," he said, slicing into a scallop. "But finance is fickle. All paper and algorithms. Real estate now, real estate is tangible. Something you can pass down. Something that holds value." My smile didn't waver, but it calcified. I lifted my glass with deliberate calm, the wine cold against my lips. "Actually," I replied evenly, "our division outperformed the S&P by 22 points last quarter. The risk assessment model I built is now being used across all regional offices." There was a pause. A beat too long, enough for the table to register the shift in tone. "Well," he said with a shrug, so casual it almost felt cruel. "Paper profits can vanish overnight. A building stays standing. Just like that dismissal delivered with a silver knife and a velvet napkin. There it was, his trademark move. Not outright rejection. No. That would require acknowledgement. What he gave instead was erosion. Quiet, slow, devastating. The kind of insult you could never quite quote back because it always came wrapped in plausibility. From across the table, Sophia looked up. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes softened. "I saw that too," they seemed to say. "I heard it too." And just like that, the spotlight moved. James picked up the baton with a grin and launched into a story about his new luxury condo project outside Cambridge. Terms like green zoning and early equity spilled from his mouth like gospel. My father leaned in rapt, the corners of his mouth lifted in approval. He nodded at all the right parts, laughed when James wanted him to, patted his shoulder like they shared the same heartbeat. It was flawless. Their choreography, I mean. Meanwhile, I faded back into the periphery, just another elegant silhouette in a dress that cost more than my first month's rent in New York. No one asked about my work again. No one asked me anything. I became ambient, like the chandelier, decorative but unnecessary. And the applause I'd once dreamed of, the recognition, the moment it would not come, not tonight, not ever. I placed my napkin on the table slowly, each movement precise. My fingers grazed the edge of my purse where the envelope rested, still sealed, still quiet. But inside me, thunder gathered. And still, no one looked my way. Not yet, but they would. The final insult came wrapped in crystal stemware and creme delivered like a benediction dipped in venom. Laughter rippled around the table like perfume, sweet, insincere, floating above decades of damage. The chandelier flickered as my father rose, bourbon in hand, wearing the practiced smile of a man who'd convinced the world he was honorable. It was time for the Matthews family toast, an annual performance dressed up as affection. The room quieted instinctively like children before a sermon, and as always, the show began with James. "To my son," he said, lifting his glass with the gravitas of royalty, whose vision and leadership carry the Matthews name into the future. "You make me proud every day." The clink of crystal, the chorus of applause. My brother beamed, soaking in praise that had always come easy. Then with a softer tone, he turned to Sophia. To my daughter, whose grace and empathy remind us that success is not only measured in numbers, but in kindness. You are the heart of this family. More applause. Tears shimmered in Sophia's eyes. Her husband kissed her hand. Even I smiled because she deserved it, and then his eyes met mine. Not warmth, not love, something colder, calculating, surgical. And finally, he paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to wound. To those who choose to walk their own path, may they one day find what they're looking for. That was it. No name, no pride, not even acknowledgement, just exile elegantly phrased. The room held its breath. Some smiled awkwardly, unsure whether it was a joke or judgment. My mother froze. Sophia's smile faltered. James smirked behind his glass. Inside me, something tore. 32 years of silence. 32 years of being the daughter who never measured up. The daughter who gave him everything and received nothing in return. The daughter who bought him a car with her first six-figure bonus and still got seated next to strangers at dinner. I rose slowly. The chair scraped back against the polished hardwood like a scream. The sound cracked through the room like a shot fired in a cathedral. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks froze mid-air. The music stopped without stopping. I felt their eyes on me, but for the first time, I didn't shrink. My voice came out low, clear, steady, and sharpened by years of pain. You know what's fascinating, Father? I've spent most of my life chasing your approval, like a starving dog chasing a moving bone. But I realized something tonight: the hunger was never mine. A hush fell so complete it hummed in my ears. You needed me to beg. You needed me to fail. Because that made it easier for you to pretend you were in control. That love was something to be earned like applause or inheritance. But guess what? Love doesn't need gatekeepers. James' straightened eyes narrowing. My mother whispered my name like a warning, but I was already gone past the point of return. I reached into my purse. The envelope felt like it was glowing. This, I said, holding it high for everyone to see, is what I've been carrying around, not just in my bag, in my bones. I tossed it onto the center of the table. The heavy paper landed with a dull thud like a gavel striking wood. A DNA test. Sealed, certified, final. It says with 100% clarity that Richard Matthews is not my biological father. The gasp was collective, audible, palpable. Someone knocked over a glass. My mother went pale. Sophia covered her mouth. James muttered something under his breath. And my father? He stared at me like I was a stranger who had broken into his house. 0%, I repeated. That's what the test says. So all these years, every time you ignored me, diminished me, compared me, you weren't disciplining a daughter. You were punishing a stranger for existing. His face contorted first with confusion, then rage, then something like fear. You could have told the truth. I continued, my voice trembling now, but growing stronger with each word. You could have raised me with decency, even if I wasn't yours. But instead, you chose to make me feel unworthy of breath. You weaponized fatherhood to feed your own insecurities. Silence. So loud it rang in my ears. I spent years thinking I was broken, that if I worked harder, climbed higher, gave more, you'd finally see me. But the truth is, I was never invisible. You just refused to look. Tears stung at the edges of my vision, but I didn't let them fall. Tonight, you gave your son pride. You gave your daughter love. And to me, you gave a curse wrapped in a toast. Well, here's mine. I lifted my glass, not in celebration, but in severance. To the truth, to freedom, to never begging again for love that should have been given freely. I drank. The wine burned, and I walked away. No one stopped me. Not James, not Mother, not even him. And for the first time in my life, the door didn't close behind me. It opened, and I didn't look back. The room remained suspended in unnatural stillness long after I was gone, like the air itself had been knocked breathless. My heels clicked down the hallway, echoing like gunshots in a cathedral each step, a rupture in the carefully manufactured reality they had all agreed to uphold. Behind me, no one spoke. No one moved. It was the silence of detonation. Then a sound, the soft clink of silverware against porcelain, someone reaching, fumbling for something ordinary in the wake of something unforgettable. And finally, after what felt like a century compressed into seconds, my mother stood. She did not gasp. She did not cry out. She did not rush after me like some Hallmark redemption fantasy. Instead, she turned slowly, deliberately toward the man at the head of the table, her husband, my not father, the man she had stood beside for 3 decades, defended, justified, softened. Her eyes found his, and for once he did not meet them with command. The man who had once filled every room with his certainty now sat small and pale beneath the weight of a single envelope. Her voice, when it came, was not loud, but it was devastating. "You did this." The words dropped like lead. He blinked as if trying to reassert the script. "She's lying," he said, grasping for his old weapon's dismissal control certainty. "She's being dramatic, manipulative. You know how she is." But she didn't flinch. "No," she said, stepping toward him. Her heels made no sound, but her presence filled the space like thunder. "The only manipulation here is the lie we've all lived for 32 years, and I helped craft it. I let it happen. I watched it happen. I told myself it was protection, that we were keeping the family intact. But what it really was cowardice." He opened his mouth again, but she lifted a hand not to strike, but to silence. "You could have loved her, Richard. It would have cost you nothing. She didn't need your name. She didn't even need your history. All she ever wanted was for you to look at her like she mattered. To hold out your hand. To say, 'You're mine even if you're not.' But you couldn't. Or wouldn't." Her voice broke not in weakness, but in anguish. "She knocked on every door in your heart, and you slammed them all shut. Every single one. And now you sit there and call her a liar?" He stared at her like a man realizing his house is on fire, but still clutching the match. "You don't understand what this means." "No," she said. "You don't. You've never understood. Because love to you was always a contract, transactional, measured in obedience and silence." Her hand trembled now, but she kept speaking. "You don't get to call yourself a father because you signed a birth certificate. You earn that title by showing up, by staying soft when it would be easier to be cruel, by seeing the child who feels unseen." Her eyes drifted to the envelope, still lying there, unmoved, undeniable. "It was always going to come out, Richard. The truth doesn't spoil like milk. It doesn't vanish in the dark. It waits, patiently, quietly, until someone is brave enough to open the door." The room stayed still. No one touched their drinks. No one looked her in the eye. Because everyone knew she wasn't just speaking to him. She was speaking to all of them. To every complicit silence, every sidelong glance. Every time someone heard her cry behind a closed door and did nothing. And then, without another word, she turned. She didn't look at James, didn't glance at Sophia, didn't try to follow me. She just walked away, her spine straight, her eyes forward. For the first time in her life, Caroline Matthews, wife of the empire keeper of the family image, chose herself. And no one stopped her. because deep down, they all knew. She had already left years ago. Tonight was just the first time she said it out loud. I walked down the driveway slowly, no need to rush anymore. The air had shifted cooler now, calmer, as if the storm inside that house had broken the sky open and left something cleaner in its wake. My heels clicked against the pavement in steady rhythm. Each step, a sentence, each sound, a punctuation mark. Final, decisive. Above me, stars began to puncture the night like tiny stitches in the dark, as though the universe itself was trying to sew something back together. When I reached the end of the drive, I paused. I turned and looked back. The house stood still behind me, majestic and meaningless. The windows glowed with a soft golden light like any other night. A stranger passing by would think it was a place of warmth, of laughter, of family. But I knew better. That light had never touched me. It had only cast shadows. That house wasn't a home, it was a stage. A monument to repression, to silence. A place where love had been replaced with performance and approval, came with price tags and conditions. It was beautiful from a distance and unbearable up close. Tonight, I had cracked its foundation, not with fire, not with screams, but with truth. And now, standing at the edge of it, I felt the weight of everything I had carried for 32 years fall away one quiet breath at a time. I opened the car door and slid into the driver's seat. The Mercedes, the one that had once been a gift, now felt like mine again. Not because I'd reclaimed it, but because I had never really given it away. Not truly. I had just used it as a last-ditch offering to someone who never deserved it, and I was done offering. I sat still, hands on the wheel, but not moving. I wasn't crying, I wasn't shaking, I wasn't waiting for anyone to come after me. I was just breathing, in and out, letting my lungs fill in a way they hadn't in years. There's a particular kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, it feels earned. That's what this was. A silence that pulsed with meaning, with grief, with clarity, with release. Somewhere in my purse, my phone buzzed. Once, then again, a third time, I could imagine the screen lighting up with names Sophia maybe, my mother, even James trying to reassert order. But I didn't reach for it, not because I was angry, because I was finally wonderfully uninterested. For most of my life, I'd measured my worth by who called me, by whose voice came through the static to say you're good enough. I'd lived for text bubbles and returned voicemails for nods across the dinner table and glances that might mean I see you. But tonight, the only voice I needed was my own. I turned the key. The engine responded with that smooth, expensive hum. It sounded like freedom, like closure, like a door unlocking somewhere deep in my ribs.
Still, I didn't drive away. Not yet. I sat with it. Sat with the ache, the aftermath, the quiet joy that felt almost forbidden. I thought of the girl I had been at 16, standing in that same driveway wearing her first pair of heels, hoping he'd notice how grown up she looked. He hadn't. I thought of the woman I was at 25, coming home for Christmas wearing the wrong lipstick, dating the wrong man, choosing the wrong career, always just slightly misaligned with the Matthews ideal. She tried so hard to twist herself into their mold, had broken pieces off just to fit. And I thought of me now, 32, unfolded, unapologetic, whole. I hadn't won. This wasn't a victory lap, but it was something better. Peace. Not the kind you find in stillness. The kind you earn by walking through fire and coming out clean on the other side. The kind that plants itself inside your chest and says, "This is who you are now." And no one gets to edit that. I finally put the car in gear. Not fleeing, not escaping, just leaving the story I'd been trapped in.
leaving the hunger, leaving the noise, leaving the silence that had never sheltered me. And as I turned onto the open road, the headlights cutting through the dark like a blade, I realized I wasn't alone. Because in the place where longing had lived, something else was growing. Not joy, not yet, but hope. Small, steady, and this time, mine. I woke up the morning after the reunion to sunlight slicing through the curtains of the hotel room, casting long, golden lines across the carpet like quiet reminders that the world was still turning. The bed felt too big, the silence too still. I lay there for a while, not scrolling, not checking, not performing, just breathing. It felt like the planet had shifted under me, not violently, but irreversibly. The kind of tectonic shift that isn't visible from above, but reshapes everything below. Less explosive than yesterday, more permanent. I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't check my emails. I didn't try to fill the silence. Instead, I let the only question that mattered echo through me. Who am I now? No longer Eliza Matthews, the model daughter. No longer the obedient echo of a man's legacy. No longer the Wall Street success story sculpted from hunger for approval. That version of me, polished, packaged, digestible, was gone. What remained was something raw, unnamed, but real. Stripping away the labels left a hollow space, and for a moment it scared me. But then I felt it, something delicate taking root in the void. Fragile, yes, but honest. A seed of self I'd buried beneath years of performance. I spent the morning walking the Back Bay boots clicking against cold brick sidewalks, my coat wrapped tight around me. Every step felt like a quiet act of rebellion against my past, against the version of me who would have smiled through pain and called it progress. No portraits of stoic ancestors, no high-rise offices filled with hollow congratulations. Just me, alone, breathing, unfiltered. The truth is, I didn't feel strong. I felt untethered, as if someone had cut the strings that held me upright. But instead of falling, I floated. I passed joggers, dog walkers, tourists snapping photos, and baristas running late. No one looked twice. No one whispered my name. And in that absence of recognition, I felt strangely free. At a small cafe tucked between two brownstones, I found a corner table and ordered black coffee. No milk, no sugar, just bitter grounding warmth. I pulled a blank notepad from my bag, stared at the untouched pages, and began to write, not for school, not for performance reviews, not for approval. For me, I am a woman who built herself from ashes. I am not my salary. I am not a burden. I am the quiet resilience between heartbreak and hope. I am not his. I never was. I am mine. Each sentence lifted something off my chest I didn't know I was still carrying. I wrote until the coffee cooled and the ink bled slightly from pressure. I wrote until my hand cramped. I wrote until the silence inside me no longer echoed, but pulsed like a heartbeat steadying itself. Later that afternoon, I messaged Sophia, "Can we talk? I need you." No script, no armor, just need. Her reply came within seconds, always. And just like that, I felt less alone. Not defined by her, but steadied, held. She wasn't a crutch. She was a mirror, one that didn't distort, didn't compare, just reflected who I was trying to become. That evening, I finally returned a missed call from my boss. Her voice was brisk, professional, but warm. "Congratulations again," she said. "When you're ready, I'd like you to lead the Richardson account next week. No mention of the Matthews family, no whispers of scandal, no questions about where I'd been. Just faith, just work, just a small, steady promise. You are valued for what you bring, not who you're tied to." After the call, I stared at the city skyline through my hotel window. Boston blinked below me, offices, homes, street lamps coming alive one by one. I opened my laptop, searched the name Thomas Keller and Boston Engineering. A few links, a company profile, a conference speaker bio from 2015. No answers yet, just hints, clues. But I felt no urgency. For the first time, I understood identity isn't something you discover like a lost earring under the bed. It's something you build, day by day, choice by choice. And I'd been building mine all along, even when I didn't know I was allowed to. That night in bed, I closed my eyes and replayed the moment from dinner. Not with rage, not with regret, with clarity. I had spoken the truth. I had unmasked the illusion. I had burned the scripts handed to me by people who only loved the version of me they could control. And now, in the ashes, I had space to become. Who am I now? I am no one's daughter by duty, no one's shadow, no one's trophy. I am the sound of my own voice, the writer of my own story, a soul brave enough to break the silence, and quiet enough to listen to what follows. And that unfinished, uncertain, unapproved is finally enough. The days that followed weren't magical. There was no movie montage of transformation, just the slow, raw unraveling of everything I thought I knew, and the careful, intentional building of what came next. I moved through the world quieter, more observant. Not passive, but listening differently. Not trying to perform for anyone anymore. I canceled a few meetings, let myself sleep in, walked instead of running. And in that stillness, I began to feel a rhythm that wasn't dictated by external validation. My identity no longer needed to be loud. One afternoon, I received an email from Thomas Keller. Subject line, "I hope this is okay." He wrote simply, "I don't know how to be a father to a grown woman I've never met, but I do know how to be honest. I didn't know about you. And if you ever want to talk, I'd be honored to meet the woman my younger self unknowingly helped create." I stared at the screen for a long time, not crying, not angry, just quiet. Because for the first time, someone was offering me connection without expectation, without performance, without rewriting my story into something more convenient. And I realized maybe I wasn't looking for a father. Maybe I was just looking for someone who could meet me without agenda, someone who didn't need me to shrink to fit their version of family. I wrote back, "I don't need a father, but I would like to meet the man who gave me the eyes I see the world through. Let's talk, no pressure." And I meant it. Meanwhile, the Matthews family remained in freefall. Legal threats about the car quickly fizzled when my lawyer responded with the DNA evidence and a calm statement. "We're happy to discuss this in court if you wish." I never heard from their counsel again. James unfollowed me on every platform. Typical. Sophia kept checking in. She didn't try to fix anything. She just stayed close. And for once, that was more than enough. Mother sent another message. "The silence is harder than I thought. I understand if you're not ready, but I'm here, whenever." I wasn't ready, but I believed her. One Sunday, I returned to New York. No triumphant music played. I stepped into my apartment, my own space bought with my own money, filled with my own choices, and sat in the silence. And in that silence, I didn't feel empty. I felt real. Over the next few weeks, I began to reclaim pieces of myself. I added a photo to my desk, not of family, but of the Manhattan skyline at dawn, a reminder of the city I'd built my life in on my own terms. I started therapy not because I was broken, but because I deserved to understand myself beyond trauma. I texted Thomas. We agreed to meet for coffee the next time he was in the city. And most importantly, I stopped trying to prove my worth to anyone, especially to ghosts. Because here's what I finally understood. Being enough isn't something you earn. It's something you recognize. And I had. That is the quiet, burning miracle of truth. It doesn't fix everything, but it frees you from needing anything that refuses to love you back. I am Eliza Matthews. Or maybe not. Maybe just Eliza. That's more than enough. The story is not over because this is only the beginning. The scariest thing is yet to come. When I met Thomas Keller, I thought I had found the truth. But the truth can smile kindly and still hide a knife. 3 days ago, I discovered more than a quiet stock transfer. I found a name his lawyer also involved in a planned accident involving me. It was more than just betrayal. It was a setup. He did not come back to be a father. He came to wipe me out, but he underestimated one thing. I saw it coming. And now, I am not running. I am hunting this empire. It will not fall into his hands, not while I am still breathing. If you found out that the Dragon Father has returned, just to take over your property and want to eliminate you, what would you do? Between the truth of the war and the integrity of your body, would you choose the color of nakedness or silence? Could it be that family is just a cover for greed? Thank you for watching the whole video. Please comment number 1 if you want to hear the next story.